All right, hello and welcome everyone to ChiroExam Prep. So, before you can understand disease, diagnosis, or treatment, you must first understand how the human body is organized and how it functions under normal physiological conditions. So, in this lesson, we're going to build that foundation by exploring the relationship between anatomy, physiology, the levels of structural organization, the major organ systems, the concept of homeostasis, etc. So if you master these fundamentals now, every topic that follows will become easier to understand. And as you're preparing to take your NBCE board exams, or maybe this is your second time taking one of them, really understanding these kind of foundational concepts is huge. Because not only will they test you directly on some of these things, especially during part one, but these words, this terminology, it will pop up in part two question stems, part three question stems. You have to understand different terms for part four when you're taking histories and things like that. So we're just going to start that foundation here in episode one and build from there. So, as stated, this is Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology, where we are going to establish the foundational principles of human structure and function. Again, just to reiterate, you absolutely need to know this stuff just to grasp a lot of the topics that are covered in the clinical sciences, especially as you advance into your third and fourth years of chiropractic school. So some learning objectives. So by the end of this video, you will be able to define anatomy and physiology and explain how structure actually relates to function. This is really the core concept that you have to pick up from today. You should be able to identify the major branches of anatomical study and the levels of structural organization. You should be able to recognize the 11 different organ systems and describe their primary functions. And you should be able to explain homeostasis, what that is, what that isn't, negative versus positive feedback mechanisms, and apply those concepts to NBCE style questions, which we will do toward the end of this video. All right, so let's start by comparing anatomy versus physiology. So anatomy is the study of the structure of the body and its relationships to one another. The core question that it asks is what is it and where is it? You have right sides and left sides. You have different directional terminology, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit on this, that can help explain the relationships to one another. So for example, your right shoulder, I can point to my right shoulder. What is it? Well, it's my right glenohumeral joint. Where is it? Well, it is proximal to my right elbow, right? It is lateral to my sternum. And I'm jumping a little bit ahead with the terminology, but this is essentially the core question that anatomy is asking. If you can define what it is and where it is, then that's anatomy. Whereas when we look at physiology, this is the study of the function of that body's structure. The core question here is what does it do and how does it work? So now we take that right shoulder joint. What does it do? Well, it does a lot of things, right? It moves in various planes. It can rotate. I can bring my arm across my body. I can bring my arm overhead. Right? It's going to allow for different functions. And then how does it work gets into the scapulohumeral rhythm, different biomechanical principles, and things like that. So why it matters is that structure actually determines function. So for example, the shoulder joint, the right glenohumeral joint, it is a ball and socket joint. It is a very shallow joint, which makes it predisposed to a lot of different types of injuries. So that mobility that we have in our shoulder that allows us to do so many different tasks also predisposes us to injury. Whereas the hip joint is also a ball and socket joint, but that femoral head is really going to sit deep in the acetabulum of the pelvis, and it's going to be much more stable. So we don't have as much mobility in our hips, especially as we're aging, as we do in the shoulders. And then an example here with an organ, specifically the lungs. The lungs are made in such a way to allow for very efficient gas exchange and simple diffusion between carbon dioxide and oxygen. So we are able to breathe, and among many other things. So this is just an example, or a couple examples rather, of how structure actually determines function. All right, so let's talk about some of the ways in which anatomy is studied and applied. And although this isn't highly tested on the NBCE board exams, it's good to know because you're going to be clinicians someday. You're going to be working in maybe a private office, maybe a hospital, maybe you're working in an academic setting and you're doing research and you're working in the cadaver lab. Whatever it may be, we need to be able to speak the same language as other healthcare providers and other physicians. So it's really important to just kind of have a general grasp on some of the, again, terminology that anatomy is associated with and how it's actually studied. So we can take gross anatomy, for example. These are structures visible to the naked eye. I can look at the body and I can kind of identify the general outline of things, right? I can see where the elbow is. I can see where my knuckles are. The skull, right? The formation of the skull. I can see muscles contracting. This is all gross anatomy. Then we have self-explanatory, which many of these will be, microscopic anatomy. These are structures requiring magnification. This type of anatomy breaks down into its subsets of like cytology and histology, the study of cells and tissues, respectively, among others, but self-explanatory. If it needs a microscope to be able to see the various structures, it is microscopic anatomy. Then we have developmental anatomy. This is the study of growth and development. So you have subsets like embryology, for example. You have aging studies where they'll compare how anatomy actually changes based on where you're at in the lifespan. So it could be you're an infant, you're a toddler, you're going through puberty, after your first menses, etc. Then we can take anatomy and we can apply it to patient care. This is called clinical anatomy. So you might see different examples of this with palpation, different imaging studies, different orthopedic and neurological examinations. We have regional anatomy. This is the study of anatomy by body region. So often in chiropractic school, we are learning regional anatomy, meaning we're kind of studying it by section. So you're going to have half a semester on the neck, and then half a semester on the thoracic spine, and then the lumbar spine, and then you might start learning the extremities. You might start learning head and neck anatomy. So it's important to kind of understand all of the structures involved in a particular region one at a time. And even in the real world, right, we have specialists in all different areas of the body. You have your fellowship trained hand surgeons, you have your spine surgeons, you have your podiatrists, your dentists, all these different people that really, really hone in and know their area of expertise. This is all regional anatomy. Then we have systemic anatomy. This is the study of anatomy by organ system. So you could take your nervous system, your endocrine system, the digestive system, pick any of the 11 that we're going to cover today, and that is systemic anatomy. And as I mentioned, the clinical relevance here is that most chiropractic anatomy is taught regionally. So, you'll often break things down by body section and kind of take it from there. And then there's just a couple additional types here that I'm just going to kind of quickly gloss over. These are also pretty relevant and you should know them, but they're not really going to test them on the boards. So I'm just going to kind of fly through these. You have surface anatomy. This is the study of the internal structures as they relate to the overlying skin surface. So like your auscultation or percussion points, you can basically place the stethoscope over certain areas by finding the anatomy, and that's going to let you listen to different heart sounds or lung sounds, for example. Radiographic anatomy, the study of anatomy using imaging, X-ray, CT, MRI, ultrasound. Cross-sectional anatomy is when you actually take a structure and you can divide it or cut it into sagittal or coronal planes, for example, and you can study how the structures are oriented from superficial to deep. Functional anatomy, how the structures actually work together to produce movement and function. These are like your biomechanics, your joint motion, joint palpation, excuse me. Living anatomy, study of anatomy in the living person through observation and palpation. Again, studying how posture changes, where different landmarks are, how to palpate things while people are moving. Pathological anatomy, how structural changes actually are affected or caused by disease or injury. So how does arthritis affect the joints? If you dislocate a joint, if you fracture a bone, this is all pathological anatomy. And the clinical relevance here is that when we talk about anatomy in the chiropractic realm, it really does extend beyond memorization. You're going to be palpating people every day. You're going to be looking at their biomechanics. You're going to be looking at imaging. You're going to be assessing all of this to form a diagnosis and help this person out. So you're kind of integrating all of this every day in practice anyway. All right, so now we're going to talk about the levels of structural organization. This is very important for you to know, and they will test it on the Part I board exam. So this is really how the human body is organized from its simplest to its most complex. At its simplest, we have the chemical level. These are the atoms and molecules that actually form the basic building blocks of life. So we are made of water, which is H2O, 2 hydrogens bonded to an oxygen. We are made of proteins, which are broken down into amino acids, and then, of course, DNA. These are the smallest things that make us, us. As we get a little bit bigger, we have our cells. These are the basic structural and functional units of life. Always good to know that definition because they will test it. Again, we have a lot of different cell types. Some examples here are some muscle cells, neurons, red blood cells, white blood cells. As we get a little bit bigger, we get to the tissue level. These are groups of similar cells now working together for a shared function. Again, lots of different tissues in our body: muscle tissue, nervous tissue, epithelial tissue. As we keep getting bigger, we have our organs. These are multiple tissue types now working together to perform a specific function. So your heart has a lot of different tissues in it, right? You have cardiac muscle. You have valves in there. You have some of the endothelial linings of the different vessels and the coronary arteries and the veins, and just multiple tissue types working together to perform the function that the heart does. And the same with the liver, same with the kidneys, same with any organ in the body. We keep getting bigger now. We have the organ system level. These are groups of organs working together to maintain body function. Your nervous system, brain and spinal cord, peripheral nerves. You have your digestive system, right? Your musculoskeletal system, providing locomotion, posture, support, all these things. And at the most complex level, we have the organism level. This is the complete living individual composed of all of its organ systems, which is the human body. So the big idea here is that each level depends on the organization and function of the levels below it. So dysfunction at one level is going to influence the levels above it. So quick example here, if you have, I'm going to use a broad example, a lot of free radical damage, you have a lot of inflammation, that might be occurring at the chemical or cellular level. That's then going to affect the tissues, which is going to affect how the organ is working. So the heart might be affected. And then if the heart's affected, you're not performing its role as well as it should. And then you start getting things like congestive heart failure. You might have a heart attack, et cetera, et cetera. And now for a general breakdown of the organ systems of the human body. Again, these are things you should be mostly familiar with. These are just the main functions of these organ systems. So we have the integumentary system, which is made of the skin, hair, nails, and various glands in the skin. Its main function is to protect the body and help to regulate temperature. We have the skeletal system. This is made of the bones, cartilage, and ligaments. Remember, ligaments connect bone to bone. This is going to provide support, protection, and structural framework. We have the muscular system. This is made of the skeletal muscles and tendons, which are attaching the muscles to the bones. This is going to produce movement and stabilize the joints. So you might see movement also called locomotion. They are pretty much the same thing. We have the nervous system made of the brain, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves. This is going to coordinate communication and control throughout the body. Remember, the brain is really the master organ. It's basically doing everything. We have the endocrine system made of your different hormones and glands. This is going to regulate body function through hormones. Lymphatic and immune system made of the lymph vessels, lymph nodes, different immune cells, things like that. This is going to defend against pathogens and maintain fluid balance through Starling forces. We have the cardiovascular system, heart, blood, and blood vessels. This is going to transport oxygen, different nutrients, hormones, waste, etc. throughout the body. Respiratory system made of the lungs and the airways. This is going to facilitate oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange, again through simple diffusion. The digestive system made of your gastrointestinal tract from mouth to anus, including some of the accessory organs like the liver and the pancreas. This is going to break down food, help you to absorb nutrients. Urinary system, bladder, ureters, kidneys. This is going to remove waste, regulate fluid balance. And then finally, our reproductive system made up of the male and female reproductive organs or gonads. This is going to support reproduction and continuation of the species. So now we can talk a little bit about homeostasis. So homeostasis is the body's ability to maintain a relatively stable internal environment despite internal and external change. So what does that actually mean? It means that we have these various internal and external stressors that are placed on our bodies that we need to constantly regulate. So our nervous system is going to control everything, as we talked about previously, and it's going to try to keep everything stable. So if you're too hot, the body's going to try to cool off. It might do that by making you sweat. If you're too cold, it's going to try to heat you up by making you shiver, for example. If you're exercising, your heart rate is probably increasing. You are heating up, so the body's going to start sweating to cool you down. Your pH might be dropping a little bit due to some lactate accumulation, and you're going to try to manage that. And then, of course, you can have different types of stress, and you can have different types of illness, bacterial, viral, parasitic, things like that, that you're going to have to try to fight off. So the body's going to use the nervous system, hormones, different thermoregulation tactics, and cardiovascular responses as some examples to regulate some of these stressors. And really, the outcome that we're looking for is that stable internal environment. We're maintaining a relatively normal temperature, blood pressure, blood glucose level, and pH within those healthy ranges. And how the body is going to regulate homeostasis is through these feedback mechanisms, of which there are really two types. We have negative feedback and positive feedback. Negative feedback is the one that is going to really restore balance. So when we have a stimulus, and for the example I'll use, which I think is easiest to understand, is the cold. The stimulus is cold. As our body temperature is dropping, the brain is going to say, hey, this is bad. We need to warm up. So the response is that we are going to start shivering. Hopefully, if that's enough, we can return to normal. So that body temperature will go back to a nice like 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. There's some more examples here. Now, most homeostatic regulation does use this negative feedback principle to regulate that homeostasis. Likewise, though, we also have positive feedback. This is going to amplify change. So, as we get that stimulus, so the example that I'm going to use, which is most commonly used, is childbirth. We get a greater response instead of returning to normal. So as these contractions begin, when a woman is going to give birth, the body just keeps pumping out oxytocin to make these contractions happen more and more and more until a specific endpoint is reached, which is delivery of the baby. This does also happen with blood clotting, for example, but childbirth is the most commonly used example of positive feedback. So less common, but physiologically important. And you really should know these two examples because you should always kind of know exceptions. So you should know overall, most homeostatic regulation does use negative feedback, but blood clotting and childbirth are the two most common methods of positive feedback to be aware of. So now how do we approach anatomy and physiology? Like, what's the best way to kind of study it? So this is how I do it. I did pretty well in school, and this is always how I kind of approach my studying. So I'm hoping to kind of pass that along to you guys listening to this video. So first, we should determine what it is. What's the definition? What's the structure? And where is it? Know what you are looking at. Okay, that's step number one. You have to be able to identify what you're looking at. Two, ask yourself, okay, I'm looking at it. What does it do? What's its function? What's its purpose? And what's the actual physiology behind it? How does it do what it does? So understand why it matters. Three, what connects to it now? I can look at the nerve innervation, the blood supply, the different attachments, the different relationships to other structures around it. You have to remember that anatomy works in systems. So you essentially pick something, identify everything about it, then start looking around at the connecting structures. Lastly, ask yourself what happens if it fails. Injury, compensation in different scenarios, the different pathological mechanisms behind if you are ill. How is inflammation going to affect that structure? Things like that. What symptoms may someone come in with if this structure is the issue? So think clinically. And the reason that we're setting all these foundational principles is because this is exactly what we're doing every day as clinicians. Someone comes in, you are legally responsible for giving them a diagnosis and forming a treatment plan off that diagnosis. So approach anatomy and physiology kind of by asking yourself these four questions, and it should take you a long way. All right, now let's get into some NBCE style questions here. These are going to be very, very basic. This is only episode 1, but should really set you up with the types of questions that they are going to ask and that you should know from these lectures. So question number 1, which body systems are primarily responsible for support, posture, and movement of the human body? nervous, endocrine, and cardiovascular systems, integumentary, skeletal, and muscular systems, digestive, respiratory, and urinary systems, or D, cardiovascular, lymphatic, and reproductive systems. So if you want, pause this video, take a minute, think about it, get the answer, and we will move on in a second. All right, so hopefully you picked answer B, the integumentary, skeletal, and muscular systems. Remember, these are the systems primarily responsible for body structure, protecting tissues, and to produce locomotion or movement. Clinically, the skeletal and muscular systems are often discussed together as the musculoskeletal system. That should kind of be self-explanatory, but it isn't always, and I don't like to assume, so I always say that. But again, your skin, your bones, and your muscles are primarily giving you this posture and this support throughout the body. Question number 2. Which body systems are primarily responsible for communication and coordination throughout the human body? So again, I'll bring up these answers, pause the video, take a second, and then we'll answer soon. So hopefully you chose answer C, the nervous and endocrine systems. Remember, the brain is the master regulator. It is using rapid electrical signaling, while the endocrine system is much slower and it communicates through hormones, which again, we'll get into all those details in future videos, but you should generally know communication coordination is the brain and the endocrine system. All right, next question here. Which body systems are primarily responsible for transport and defense within the human body? So defense is kind of your key word here. So as you're looking at these, hopefully you get answer A, the cardiovascular and lymphatic or immune systems. So remember, the cardiovascular system is transporting various nutrients, hormones, waste products throughout the body. And the lymphatic system is really the one that is primarily being defensive against different pathogens in the body. So that transport and defense, cardiovascular, lymphatic systems. Next question, which body systems are primarily responsible for exchange within the human body? Take a minute. Hopefully you get answer D, the respiratory system, the digestive system, and the urinary system. So the respiratory system, these are really your lungs and airways. This is going to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. Digestive system is absorbing nutrients, water, and then the urinary system is often included in this sometimes because it is removing waste while regulating fluid balance. So you won't always see the urinary system here, but just know that it can pop up when we're talking about exchange within the human body. So the right answer is D. And then which type of anatomy focuses on structures visible to the naked eye? Hopefully you got answer B. Gross anatomy, also called macroscopic anatomy, studies structures that can be seen without magnification, including bones, muscles, organs, and joints. Next question, which sequence correctly represents the levels of structural organization from simplest to most complex? So essentially from smallest to largest. Take a minute, look at these. Hopefully you chose answer B. The body is organized from simplest to most complex, beginning with the chemical level and ending with organism, which is the most complex form of structural organization. Which of the following is an example of positive feedback now? So remember, you have a few exceptions. Most are done via negative feedback. So which is the example of positive feedback? Take a minute. Answer is D, oxytocin-mediated uterine contractions. So remember, positive feedback is going to amplify a physiological process until an endpoint is reached. So during childbirth, oxytocin is going to strengthen uterine contractions until delivery occurs. Another example would be blood clotting. So key takeaways here. Anatomy is the study of structure. Physiology is the study of function. Structure is going to determine function. Then we have homeostasis, which is really just internal balance. We have stability. And homeostasis is achieved through two feedback mechanisms, negative, which is most common, and positive, which is going to amplify a change. Remember those examples of a few of those. And really, the important thing here is to understand things before you just try to memorize them. When I was in school, so many students would just learn material for an exam and then dump the information, and they couldn't apply it clinically. And I still see this to this day. There's so many clinicians out there who don't truly take the time to understand something, and they're still doing things that aren't the most evidence-based or evidence-informed. So really try to understand things. Don't just memorize them for the sake of memorizing them. All right, so that concludes our introduction to anatomy and physiology. In this lesson, we explored the relationship between structure and function, the levels of structural organization within the human body, some of the major organ systems, and the principles of homeostasis. These concepts really do form the foundation for everything that follows throughout your training. So please take the time to review some of these key concepts and practice questions from this episode. A strong understanding of these fundamentals will make future topics significantly easier to learn, apply, and actually understand. So in the next episode, we'll begin developing the language of anatomy by exploring what anatomical position is and what directional terminology is most often used and tested. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next lesson.